So one of the crucial cornerstone key pieces of following Jesus is this ethic, this culture, this way of life that is rooted in the love of neighbor. And Jesus has lots of stories, parables, and interactions that open this up for us. But at the core, at the end of the day, Jesus continues to over and over again impress upon his followers that our love of God is inseparable from how we love each other here on earth, how we love our neighbor, those people around us who God has placed around us. And sometimes we think of love of neighbor simply as the people who maybe live as our literal neighbor, as we say, down our street or next door. Or maybe we do expansively think a little more, our neighbor as the people we go to church with, or even more than that, maybe we think of our neighbor as the people we work with or go to school with. Jesus doesn't really put limitations on this idea, but in a lot of ways, sometimes we underestimate how far that idea of neighbor travels, and recognizing that it's everybody who God places around us. And in particular, the idea of love your neighbor then becomes inseparable from the idea of knowing our neighbor. If we don't know our neighbor, how can we love our neighbor? And knowing isn't just the idea of knowing somebody's Starbucks order so we can get that for them on a cold day, although that's a great thing to do. Knowing our neighbor involves knowing what their triumphs look like. Knowing our neighbor involves knowing what their struggles look like. Knowing our neighbor involves knowing their history, knowing their past experiences. And maybe that's even more than the history of their own lives, but the history of the lives of their families, their ancestors. On March 23rd, we are going to engage here at Wellington Square in an exercise that will help us to know our neighbors better, particularly the experiences of our indigenous siblings and neighbors here in what we now call Canada in the north of Turtle Island. We'll be engaging on March 23rd from 1 to 3 p.m. in the blanket exercise, which is an experience, an exercise created by Kairos Canada, which is an ecumenical justice organization rooted in the United Church, where we'll come together here at Wellington Square to learn about the history of the experiences of indigenous people in the north of Turtle Island since colonization. We'll take a walk, literally a step into history as we look at how colonization impacted our indigenous siblings, how it continues to impact our society today. And as those of us many of us here at Wellington Square come from the ancestry of the settlers who forged ahead with the project of colonization, we'll learn the hard truth of how we need to be transformed, about how we need to grow deeper in understanding the impact of colonization in order to know our neighbor, in order to love our neighbor, in order to move closer into this world of justice that God really, truly is calling us forward into. So much like our February book study with Desmond Cole's The Skin We're In, it'll be challenging. It'll be hard. There'll be moments when we probably want to just leave. But Jesus calls us to hard things. Jesus calls us to look at hard truths. And on March 23rd, when we engage in this blanket exercise, it'll be a challenging but incredibly important way for us to know our neighbor so that we can love our neighbor, so that we can follow Jesus faithfully and build the kind of world that Jesus talked about. So you are invited to join us on March 23rd here at Wellington Square, where we'll engage in the blanket exercise together as a community. We hope to see you there.